Oh, come by the hills to the land where fancy is free, and stand where the peaks reach the sky and the lochs meet the sea, where the rivers run clear and the bracken is gold in the sun, and the cares of tomorrow must wait till this day is done. Oh, come by the hills to the land where life is a song, and the birds fill the air with their joy all the day long, where the trees sway in time and even the wind sings in tune, and the cares of tomorrow must wait till this day is done. And the cares of tomorrow must wait till this day is done. A remarkably hopeful statement. If it be true, then how does a young man bring himself to leave such a place, to set kith and kin behind him, and as the poet said, go on his wander? It is a question without answer, for truly the hows and the whys and the wherefores of leaving one's home and family, and the mountains and glens that saturate the senses and nourish the soul, are never truly dealt with. They are lost in that moment when a young man realizes that leaving is unthinkable, but staying is impossible. When the smell of life comes on the winds of far places, and you must away and taste that life. Where the past has been lost and the future is soon to be won, and the cares of tomorrow must wait till this day is done. My grandfather had spent time in the south as a young man, and he wandered all over Scotland before he returned and settled to the life of Mingalee, the fishing village where I was born in the year of our Lord 1825. As a wee boy, he would read to me the ledgers of those travels, and the stories of the places and the people became the wonder of my life, a wonder I was never to lose. And in time, I shall tell you a wee bit of the story of this young man's wander. But for that to mean anything to you, I must first tell you a wee bit of what it was that I left behind. And that story must start, I suppose, at the far boundary of a wee boy's memory. And at the edge of that memory stands the broad, strong man that I loved and feared with an equal preoccupation. The life of your people is a life full of history and legend, my grandfather would say. To know yourself as a Highland man, you must know the history and the legends, know them and understand them with the understanding of the heart. And in my grandfather, I had a teacher who understood well the matters of the heart. He was full of the songs and stories of our ancestors, and he would tell me of the history reaching far into the recesses of antiquity and culminating in the proud but bloody period of Bonnie Prince Jack. And countless times walking the hill, my granda would start to hum the old Chevalier's mustard call, the call to arms, and I would feel the excitement start. And in my grandfather's words, the great clans and their leaders would gather, and they and their bonny prince would live again. Oh, wouldn't he fight for Charlie? Oh, wouldn't he draw the sword? Oh, wouldn't he up and rally up the loyal princes, what? See the northern clans advancing, see Glengarry and Lochiel, see the brandished broadswords dancing, Highland hearts as true as steel. Chalice safely o'er the friendly main. Many's the heart will break in twain, should he no come back again. Will ye no come back again? Loved you cannot be. Will you no come back again? I would not like to leave you with the impression that my granda passed on to me nothing but the sore side of the Scottish experience. Quite the opposite. For to encourage anything more than a thorough and healthy awareness of one's heritage, or to wallow in the pain inflicted by the past, is the act of a foolish man. And if you burned my grandfather as a fool, you'd have damned wise ashes. And so my grandmother, with every bit the iron of my granda, and yet the gentleness of a wee glen sparrow, as she would clutch you to her breast by the warmth of the fire. And my dear mother and father, each as loving and yet stern as the other. But if the Highlander is stern and rugged, it is not without reason. For whatever the land gave, it gave grudgingly, but thankfully in sufficient quantity to keep body and soul together. And when the elements of such a life did seem to conspire against the spirit, the land itself provided comfort in liquid form. Oh, aye, it is certain to say that for my granda, as indeed for most of the men of the Highlands, the whisky was a bit of a constant companion. It was certainly constant, every second or third hoose having a still of its own. But it was company to a people that lived in areas sometimes so remote that it might well be weeks between visits with even their closest neighbours. But if the liquor provided comfort, it also caused some anxiety for the families of those too much smitten with this breath of the mountains. It never became too much of a problem for my granda, thank God. No, thank Granny. But neither did it leave him entirely to his prayers. I recall one afternoon, a Saturday, I think, I went up the hill to my grandparents' house for a wee visit. And I found my granda alone, my granny being off at the market. Now, for my granda, company was reason to celebrate. Even if the company was his own grandson, and he no bigger than 2 scrubbing brushes. So my granda, he gave me a big hug and a wee tug. Always my sign to get his whiskey from the sideboard.
No, 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 my manny, said he. I swore to your granny that I'd put neither hand nor lips to a glass today.
But I dare say, if you just pour a wee drop into that teacup, I could well manage that. My granda was nothing if not industrious. And as he used to say, where there's a will, there's a public house. Oh, terrible stuff. And he proceeded to demonstrate, if not the strength of his will, at least the strength of his thirst, by drinking enough of the whiskey to fill the teapot, let alone the teacup, and inevitably chuckled his way through this wee song that by now I was most acquainted with. His love song to the whiskey. I am a weaver, a Carlton weaver. I am a rash and a roving blade. I've got silver in my pockets, and I follow the roving trade. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy. as I went in to Glasgow City. Nancy whiskey I chanced to smell. I went in, sat down beside her. 7 long years I loved her well. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy. The more I kissed her, the more I loved her. The more I kissed her, the more she smiled. I soon forgot my mother's teaching. Nancy whiskey had me beguiled. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Come all ye weavers, ye Carlton weavers. Come all ye weavers, wherever you be. Just beware, Nancy whiskey. She'll ruin you like she's ruined me. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy whiskey. Whiskey, whiskey, Nancy, oh. Oh.
You may not believe this, but cream of mushroom soup and minute rice make a simple dish that's scrumptiously different. To a can of condensed mushroom soup, add a can of water and bring to a boil. Using the soup can to measure, add 2 cans full of minute rice. 2 cans and stir. Cover, remove from heat, and let stand for 5 minutes. Super mushroom rice. Mmm. You make it with minute rice. Long grain rice that's ready in 5 minutes.
Anybody keeping store?
Judge Lane, past your bedtime, isn't it?
Oh, I wish my cold knew that. Put my head down and can't breathe.
Ah, here you go. Instant cold medicine.
Instant cold medicine.
Tristan Mist goes to work in less than a minute. I wouldn't dream of having a cold without it.
Open and shut case, eh?
Yep. Open the nose so you can shut the eyes. Tristan Mist.
Fresh squeezed orange juice is the best tasting orange juice, and we believe that fresh squeezed taste makes Minute Maid Concentrate the best tasting brand you can buy. With Minute Maid, you get the delicious taste and all the nutrition of fresh squeezed orange juice. Because Minute Maid is all juice and nothing but juice, concentrated from freshly squeezed oranges. After all, how can you improve on fresh squeezed taste and nutrition? Minute Maid, goodness at its best.
More sandwiches?
Coming, Mom. Oh, I just love family reunions.
They sure are packing away the maple leaf cold cuts.
It's a good thing Maple Leaf makes so many delicious kinds. Cooked ham, salami, bologna.
Made with good red beef and good lean pork. That and Maple Leaf special seasonings. Can't beat a combination like that. Think I'll dig in myself.
Me too. After all, I'm family too.
Maple Leaf. It's our best. Make it yours.
So, the time for my leave-taking did come, and those whom I loved had resigned themselves to the fact. Nearly. An old friend of my father's had promised me employment in his wool mill in Aberdeen to commence on the 1st day of June of this year, 1847. It was therefore decided that I would depart for Aberdeen on the 1st of May or thereabouts, in order to allow ample time for my journey. So, all was most convenient. Until it was remembered that the wedding of my cousin Mary had been arranged for a fortnight to the day following my departure. Well, now, this might not seem to be such an acute dilemma for you, but for 2 very special reasons it was for me. First of all, Mary and I had been raised together. She, being only a 1.5 years younger than I, we were inseparable as weans. And secondly, there's nothing I like better than a bloody good party. And Mary's wedding was going to be a bloody good party. Step we gaily, on we go, heel for heel and toe for toe. Arm and row, all for Mara's wedding. Over hillways, up and down, myrtle green and bracken brown, past the shieling through the town, all for the sake of Mary. Now, needless to say, I was distressed about how I should tell Mary of my predicament. But as usual, the men ponder while the women prepare. And Mary had found out about my problem almost as quickly as I. The women having a remarkable system of communication. And she advanced the date of the wedding by a fortnight. Now, she explained this by saying that she was afraid she would be unable to find someone to sing her bridal dedication without having to go outside of the family, and therefore having to pay for it. So she was giving in to the lesser of two evils. Well, coming from a family that boasted a fair contingent of apt singers, the explanation was less than plausible. But touchingly considerate of my feelings, it made it no easier to contemplate the separation from a family possessing such love and loyalty, one for the other. Step we gaily, on we go, heel for heel and toe for toe, arm and row, all for Mary's wedding. Red her cheeks as ravens are, brighter eyes than any star, fairest of them all by far, it's your darling Mary. The house was jammed to the very slope of the roof, and my family and their true and good friends rejoiced in their acquaintance one for the other. And round the whiskey tables the men all gathered, leading each other on in the celebration of Highland lads. And in the main room of the house, my granny holding court on the one stuffed chair, all the weans and all the women round her. What a grand old woman she was, with a wit to match her tongue, and both of them sharp as a dirk. I recall at one point passing through the house, and I overheard part of a conversation among the women concerning the recent celebration of a jubilee by one of the members of the royal family to the south. There seemed to be some confusion here as to the specific nature of this jubilee, and old Agnes Cleary, our parish midwife, and a woman who no doubt had the grace of God in her heart, although maybe it never quite reached out to the end of her tongue, decided that she would present her own idea and promptly made something up. Now, this kind of challenge my granny could not let go unanswered, and with great command she said, Agnes, if you want to know the truth of it, it's plain enough. You ken when you're married 25 years, that's your silver wedding. And you ken when you're married 50 years, that's your golden wedding. Well, when your husband dies, that's your jubilee. Plenty herring, plenty meal, plenty peat to fill your creel, plenty bonny bairns as veal, that's your toast to Mary. Step we gaily, on we go, heel for heel and toe for toe, arm and row, all for Mary's wedding. And the day graciously grew into evening, and the feasting and the blethering done, the dancing was to get underway in earnest. And from the yard came the smell of the long torches being lit and placed about to gaze down on the festivities. Come, all ye young lassies, far ere ye be, so sleepy and so drowsy, I ken by your knee. In all this wide world, you'll ne'er find a friend like the lads that were here among heather. And of all your satins, your silks and your shawls, your soirees and your parties and your elegant balls, one dance in the park is worth 10 in the halls with the lads that were here among heather. And they danced on, and they danced on, until the torches lost their power over the darkness, and the morning came. And then the next morning came, and with it, the tide that would take me to the mainland. A fishing boat of the village had been arranged as my transport across, and a great many of the villagers turned up to see me off. The parting was accomplished as quickly and mercifully as possible, and the hugs were brusque. And at the last, I stood looking at the four of them, my parents and my grandparents. Words were as painful for one as for the other, and were few. My ma and my daddy implored me to look after myself and assured me of my constant place in their thoughts. And my granny and granda discharged what they considered to be their duty by each offering their own wee bit of advice. My granda's was brief and straightforward. "My son, if you marry, dinna marry for silver. You can borrow cheaper. And remember, the devil hates a hearty laugh." And then my granny. And from her I could not imagine what particular piece of advice I should receive. I did not wait long. "My wee son," says she, "now you might not think your granny knows very much about what's waiting for you out there. But I ken you love me, and you'll heed me anyway. Now, in the country, breeding is considered good form. But in the city, it's considered good fun. So you just mind where you bide from." And with that, she kissed me, and she shoved me towards the boat. And it was done. The water was calm, and the crossing would be short, and only 5 men, along with myself, were required for the row. But at the last minute, a full crew of 10 came on board, and I was not allowed an oar. And at that, my struggle with the tears began. And thankfully, big Geordie McCallum began to sing the rowing song that for the men of Mingalay was as much a need to the spirit as to the arms on the long hours of rowing after the fish.
Esso salutes the savers. Esso salutes Terry Spensley for using a long life oil that also gives him super premium engine protection. And the Coles on switching to radial tires that save them gasoline. And Alan Sirota for getting a regular engine tune-up to save him gasoline. People like these look to Esso because they know Esso research results in products and services that can help them save. Esso, part of Canada's future for the past 100 years.
Yes, sometimes my headaches are pretty bad.
Mrs. Thomas, there's a pain reliever under one of these boxes you should know about.
Oh, sure. Another pain reliever.
In just 2 tablets, it has more than 900 milligrams of pain reliever.
900? That's a lot.
Yes, it is.
Anacin. Anacin has that much strength?
Over 900 milligrams in just 2 tablets. Adult strength.
With strength like that, I'll try Anacin.
Anacin. Adult strength.
Bring your fantasies to life this week at Woolco during the hobby sale. 30% off the regular Woco prices on a fantastic selection of Aurora and Tyco racing cars and accessories. Revell model kits for cars, trucks, cycles, and shoppers. Plus Bachmann switches, tracks, and railway cars. And there are tester model paint kits that'll brighten up your toys with spectacular colors. It's all for fun and fun for all during our 30% off hobby sale this week at Woco.
The sun is up, my family's up. They love to start each morning. Mama always has a favorite, Tang every morning.
Tang is their favorite. We all prefer the fresh orange taste of Tang orange flavor breakfast crystals.
Tang every morning.
And Tang is my favorite too, because Tang has the goodness of vitamin C. Vitamin C every day helps keep us healthy.
Mama always has a favorite, Tang every morning.
The heaviness of my heart at leaving my home lightened with each step I took in the newfound beauty of the mainland. And I walked, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked. And as I continued to walk, I realized you can do a lot of bloody walking in Scotland. But I did get the odd lift from a passing cart. And within about 3 weeks, I was getting very near my destination of Aberdeen. And I was congratulating myself at my strength of purpose at keeping to my road. And early one morning, I met. The wind, it was howling, o'er moor and o'er mountain, and wild was the surge on the dark rolling sea. When just about daybreak, I met a young lassie who asked me the road and the miles to Dundee. Said I, my young lassie, I canna well tell you the road and the distance, I canna well gie. But if you'll permit me to gang a wee bitty, I'll show you the road and the miles to Dundee. At once she consented, she gave me her hand, but ne'er a word did I speir who the lassie might be. She appeared like an angel in feature and form, as she strolled by my side on the road to Dundee. She took the gold pin that she wore at her bosom, saying, "Here, take ye this in remembrance o' me." And bravely I bent, and I kissed her sweet lips, ere I parted with her on the road to Dundee. My heart was at once captured and broken on this road to Dundee, as I found that my bonny Jean was going there to meet the family of her uncle, and with them to take transport to Canada. I was so full of this lassie, and by the way, she seemed fair fond of me, that I would have pledged to follow her to the moon. But to Canada? My God, man, it was the other side of the earth. So the parting was terrible, and I didn't know whether I had found a rope or lost a mule. A perfect portrait of a young man in the throes of his first heartbreak. And I certainly enjoyed it as much as I could. And my second night outside of Dundee found me sleeping under the sky, as my money was in a sorely depleted state by this point. As the night was chill, I took from my sack the one dear possession I had taken from home, my Highland plaid, and I placed it between me and the night, carefully formed the picture of my Jean's face in my memory and prepared to welcome sleep, when suddenly the figures of 3 men stood silhouetted against the moon. I was not a little afraid as my hand went to my blade and I jumped up in the darkness. But the men quickly explained that they were themselves Highlanders and had recognized our affiliation by the tartan keeping me warm, and were pleased to offer me shelter in a cottage they had close by. Now, being less afraid but no less chilled, I was pleased to accept. And the warmth of their lodging was welcome, as they offered me their food and invited me to share in the fraternity of their Highland Brotherhood, as they called it. And I was, of course, very pleased to accept both their hospitality and their friendship, although I was somewhat surprised when the elder of the 3 men began to speak of our cause and to see how men like ourselves must not allow the memory of bonny Prince Charlie to die in the heart of the Scot. I didn't quite know how to respond to the fervour with which he spoke, and as my mouth was trying to form some reply, I was spared the trouble. The 2 doors of the wee cottage were at once flattened, and 4 men stood in the doorway I sat facing. I had time to rise to my feet and recognise the presence behind me before the burning pain shot through my neck and down into my shoulder, and I realised I was losing consciousness. My cell was about 8 feet long by 6 feet wide, and there I remained without explanation or visitation. It's surprising how quickly a man can feel he's going mad. But I was saved, at least from that prospect, by the appearance of 2 guards who, with the end of their billy clubs, indicated that I should accompany them. The waiting time was brief, and the magistrate briefer.
You men have been found to be known members of a mercenary rebel organization involved in acts of sedition, treasonous to the crown of Great Britain. You have therefore been found guilty of the act of treason, and it is only through the leniency of this court that your lives are to be spared. You will be held here until the first conveyance becomes available, at which time you shall be removed to Her Majesty's Penal Colony in Botany Bay, where you will serve 12 years hard labour for your crimes.
At that, my 3 companions began to curse the crown and curse the court, and I began to faint. Back in my cell, it did not take me long to put the bits together and realize my dilemma. What I should or could do about it was a vastly more difficult problem. But if a man is anything, he is adaptable. And by the second night following my conviction for this crime of leaving home, I found myself able to rob the night of a few moments of sleep. But my slumber was suddenly broken as the man I recognized to be John stood before me in the clothing of the prison guards. He hurried me through a maze of tunnel to the yard and eventually into the back of a cart. And as I moved toward my own freedom, I began to imagine the importance of this man whose escape had been so obviously and so effectively arranged. And at the last, I stood shivering in the chilling light of the day, watching John's cart move off into the morning mist, and I silently thanked him. And of course I realized that indeed I was thanking him for my life. The boat's name was the Isabella, a converted whaling ship now transporting cargo, and she was expected to dock on the 29th day of May 1847 at the city of Quebec. I was going to Canada, with a blanket from the back of the cart, not a farthing in my pocket, and not a friend in the world, and a wee gold brooch pinned to the inside of my shirt.
Almost ready, Davy.
I'm not dead. This cold.
Come on. Your mom just stocked up. There's medication to relieve sinus pressure, medication for congestion, even something for aches and fever.
Dristan? And what else?
Nothing else. Your mom says with Dristan, you shouldn't take another thing.
Dristan, a lot going for you.
She looks a lot better. And you too, Davy.
Thanks to Dristan and Mom.
Cardinal!
Cardinal.
Cardinal!
Cardinal.
People who know a great watch at a great price are sporting Cardinals this year. Genuine 17-jewel movements or quartz precision. If you're smart, you'll wear one yourself or slip one on a wrist you love. Cardinal! So much watch for so much less.
There's nothing like it. Thank you, Colonel.
This is the real secret of Colonel Sanders' Kentucky Fried Chicken. Ingredients that are fresh and wholesome. Everything the very best. Couldn't you go for some of that good chicken right now?
Something like the way you boys and girls make me think of licking good.
There's nothing like it.
Thank you, Colonel.
Good chicken.
Without the Dream Whip on it, it just isn't dessert.
Dream Whip, its fluffy texture and delicate taste make ordinary desserts extraordinary.
Without the Dream Whip on it, it just isn't dessert.
Dream Whip Dessert Topping Mix. The fluffy texture and delicate taste make any dessert deliciously irresistible.
Without the Dream Whip on it, it just isn't dessert.
Dessert's not dessert till Dream Whip tops it off.
Due to the unusual circumstances surrounding my coming on board, I was regarded with considerable suspicion by the men. But by going easy and keeping always cheerful and free from reproach, I was able to win them over to a degree at least of comfort. And I was even fortunate enough to find 2 men willing to take assurance of my health and well-being to my family, as they would find themselves in Mingulay for the sealing the following year. But for the most, I lived as somewhat of a recluse, spending my days below decks in a hammock strung above some 20 bales of uncleaned wool. I've somehow never been overly fond of mutton since that crossing. And I spent a great deal of time in that hammock thinking back to my family, to Mingulay, and wondering if I should ever see them again. But if my memory was fixed on one side of the ocean, my mind was fleeing to the other, as the thoughts of perhaps seeing my Jean once more caused the days to pass as weeks, and the nights to linger forever.
And bring the lassie back to me, that ice is sweet and clean. One smile, free heart.
And the trumpets calling the angels back to heaven could not have been heard with more joy than the shouts of the mate announcing port that fine Friday morning. And my heart beat as though it alone had powered this vessel across the sea as I walked down the gangplank to the city of Quebec in this glorious country of Canada. And in the offices of the shipping line that handled the passenger trade, I could scarce get my words out as I demanded to know when my Jean's ship might arrive.
No, it doesn't seem to be, charted here, mister,
said this young man, who, in his slowness, seemed to be trying to keep me from a reunion with Jean.
If you had given him a penny for his thoughts, you'd have change coming.
And while he was in the back checking the other ledger, the dreadful thought that she might have already arrived jumped to my mind. And if so, how in God's name would I ever find her? And I was at the point of distraction when...
Arriving on the St. David James, the week of August the 4th, 1847. There you have it, mister.
Oh, thank God, she's no here yet. But then realizing the date...
But, my God, man, that's over a month away. Well, if it's finding this family you're after, well, that'll just give you time to make the trip. What trip? Oh, for God's sakes, boy. This ship docks in Halifax.
Well, it was obvious I had 2 things to do. One was to determine the route to this Halifax and depart tomorrow. And the other was to determine the route to the nearest pub and get drunk the day. And I thank God for the fine summer sun. And I put some bread and some cheese and a fishing line into a wee bit blanket, pointed myself eastward, and put one foot in front of the other, over and over again. Come along, let us foot it out together. Come along, be it fair and stormy weather. With the hills of home behind us and the memory of the heather, let us sing a wee bit chorus. Come along, come along. Sweet Lord, what a grand country it was. Every bend bringing more beauty with its rivers and lakes and hills. Oh, gaily sings the lark, and the sky is all awake with the promise of the day, for the road we gladly take. So it's heel and toe before us, bidding farewell to the town, for the welcome that awaits us ere the sun goes down.
And the sense of excitement and adventure I felt as I travelled the miles, I cannot say. And it occurs to me now that the only reason I was not overwhelmed at the unknown prospects of my fate was a definite lack of wit.
Where I would work, how I should live and keep myself, occurred to me only seldom, and always in a very hopeful manner. Indeed, I was a young man full of hope, and the only doubt that ever entered my mind concerned this lassie. Oh, aye, about this lassie I did have doubt as I lay at night under the stars. You must love me, Jean. You must. And the sight of Halifax Harbour and the sea and the great ships caused my blood to run so hot and beat in my veins so fast that I had to sit down for fear of falling down. And I knew then that God had chosen to hold me in the palm of his hand, and that I would prosper in this broad new land. But what would prosperity be, I thought, without the love of my Jean, as the fear once again tightened around my heart, this fear that I had hung my heart on a daydream. And it subsided for not a moment of the 9 endless days that I sat on my familiar spot on Citadel Hill. I'm sure that by this time a part of my anatomy thought that its lifelong function was to protect this little bit of ground from the summer's burning sun. And then, even with 9 days' preparation, I was moved to shock as I saw the boat begin to inch its way into the harbor. And I knew that this was my boat. And suddenly there she stood, amid the clamour of the dock, more beautiful than the memory. And I could not direct a muscle of my body in her direction. This lassie, so long and constantly the focus of my mind's eye, now stood before me, and I couldn't move. And suddenly a wee boy ran down the gangplank to his daddy's arms, and he hit Jean as he passed, and she turned to keep grasp of the basket. And she looked directly into my eyes. And I had my answer. Who will walk with thee, my Jean, by the deep blue sea, my Jean, o'er the fragrant at thy side, my Jean, at the high spring tide, my Jean, walking with his
You know what those guys used to call me? Pickles. Can you believe it? You see, I had all these ugly warts. That is, until I found out about Compound W. Compound W penetrates fast, shrinks warts away painlessly without cutting or burning. Helps prevent spreading, too. Compound W really works. Now you know what they call me? the shooter. And that's okay by me. Compound W gets rid of warts.
People taking time for one another, being with friends, talking things over. Mellow roast makes it so smooth.
Mellow Roast instant coffee, blended with roasted grain and chicory. Great coffee aroma, rich roasted coffee beans. The unique blend that smooths away bitterness and gives you full coffee flavor.
People agree on full coffee flavor. Mellow roast makes it so smooth.
When I serve chicken, I serve minute rice. It's a fast and simple way to fancy up an everyday meal. With coated chicken, I serve orange rice. Minute rice cooked in orange juice instead of water. With roast chicken, I serve minute rice plain, delicious with gravy. And fried chicken, I fancy it up by adding peas and carrots to minute rice. Minute rice is one of my favorite ways to make supper simpler. It's long grain rice that's ready in 5 minutes.
Dad, tell me honestly, what are his chances?
Sunday on Home Fires, the war becomes reality when Sydney's best friend is critically wounded and complications set in.
For God's sake, don't lose it.
In her new factory job, Cherry learns about welding and responsibility.
Every weld broken could mean a dead pilot.
And Terry and Mark put on a show for the bond drive.
The more you smile, the less likely they are to look at your feet.
Jared Parks stars in Home Fires Sunday at 9 on CBC.
We thought the wedding would be a small affair. Just Jean's family, whom I had come to love so very much in the 12 short months I had known them. But it seems the celebration of a marriage in this new Scotland was as loath to go unnoticed as it was in the old. And even brief or passing acquaintances chose this occasion to form and strengthen good friendships. And Jean and I wore the tartan that the women of Mingalay had woven and sent out for the occasion. And in my hand a bit of paper acknowledging the mistake made in my conviction back home lay in the pages of my favourite book, my granda's ledgers. 3 very special wedding presents. And 10 months and 4 days later, Robert Gordon was born. And if you're wondering about the delay, it took Jean and I a while to get used to the climate. And if another man had ever known such happiness, he was as unable as I to communicate it. For the sweetest of poetry could not capture what I felt in my heart. And the first years brought a bounty of God's gifts. With financing from Jean's uncle, and the skills at shipbuilding I had learned from my daddy, I was able to establish a trade that brought security to my wee household. And in September of the following year, my wee household was made a wee bit bigger with the birth of my darling Mary. And 22 months from that, my precious Heather was born. And the house was full of the laughter and cries of wee ones. Oh, and Jean and I will acquaint ourselves with the joy of them. I can hear Jean's voice even now, high and sweet, as she would sing to them at night in their cots and cradle. Ali Bali, Ali Bali Bee, sitting on your daddy's knee, greeting for a wee Bobby, to buy some Coulter's candy, to buy some Coulter's candy. The winter was severe that year, and relentless. And on New Year's Day, 1853, the harshness of the climate and the illness from Heather's birth 3 months before silenced my Jean's voice. At least to all ears but mine. Von kiss and then we sever. Before now, alas, forever, would we never love and parted, I'd ne be so broken hearted. New Year's Day, 1853. And in just under 2 hours from now, that will be 14 years ago the day. And throughout those 14 years, God has continued to smile down on my little household and the true and good friends who refuse to distinguish between my family and their own. And my three have grown straight and strong. And the lassies are growing into Jean's beauty more with every day. And Robert now crouches down a wee bit when he speaks to me. Robert, he's no my bonny wee son anymore. Mary, see to the guests, dear. I should tell you this, and I'll make it quick. And I hope to hell I've no kept you, for I know it's New Year's Eve and you've all things to do. And God knows I'll have a house full myself. But when the weans were getting a little older, and Robert nearly 14, I decided that they should have access to some proper reading material to explore the world of literature, if they so desired. And the little library was a luxury that I thought should well be afforded, and it made a cosy wee corner of the den, and I was well pleased with the use the children made of it. And of course, out of the trunk came my granddad's ledgers. And I had them bound in the finest leather available, and they took their proper place. The first book on the first shelf. And I always meant that one day I would introduce the children to their great-grandfather through this most personal account of his younger days. But it seems my granddad's own attraction permeated this book. For when Robert was 14 or so, he decided to take it from the shelf and browse through it. Or so he thought. But my granda was never a man to be perused. And Robert was through it in the first sitting. The first of many readings I was later to learn. And I had a wonderful sense of security in the thought that his great-grandfather's words would inspire in Robert his own awareness of that intangible spark that lies at the center of us all. But in her daddy's selfishness, I might have wished that the spark had not blazed so. For Robert has now returned to Scotland and the Highlands to see for himself the land of his heritage, the land that his great-grandfather so vividly described. And of course, he's far too young to be away. But only 3 months younger than I when I left Mingalay. Not much excuse to have withheld a daddy's permission. And I must hearken back to my great-grandfather a final time. For I can't forget his words to my mother the night at the dinner table when I first expressed my desire to leave home. It's all a matter of how long it takes a boy to grow into his beard. For they all must become men in time. I did remember to hearken back to his great-grandmother a final time and explained to Robert the difference between good form and good fun. Well, the story's done. And in a wee while, it will be the new year.
And God knows what this year of 1867 will bring to us all. But may we all continue in health and in happiness. And before I go, there's one wee song that I would like to sing for you. It seems appropriate to the occasion. And it's the one song I think I ever heard my granny and my granda sing together. And that's at New Year's Eve.